Captain William Harrison sat in his small tent somewhere in the mountains of Afghanistan, staring at the blank piece of paper in front of him. The flickering candle cast dancing shadows on the canvas walls as he picked up his pen with trembling fingers. Outside, he could hear the distant sound of his fellow soldiers talking quietly around their evening fire. But inside his tent, the silence felt heavy and meaningful. William was 34 years old, a career soldier who had served in the British Army for 16 years. He had joined when he was just 18, full of dreams about serving his country and making his father proud. His father had been a soldier too, and his grandfather before that. The Harrison family had a long tradition of military service that stretched back over a century. But tonight was different from all the other nights William had spent in various military bases around the world. Tonight, he was writing what he knew might be his final letter to the most important person in his life, his 7-year-old daughter, Emma. Emma lived back in England with her mother Sarah, William's ex. The marriage had ended 3 years ago, not because they didn't love each other, but because the constant deployments and the stress of military life had slowly pulled them apart. Sarah had tried to be understanding, but watching her husband leave for dangerous missions month after month had eventually become too much for her to bear. The divorce had been painful for everyone involved, especially little Emma, who didn't understand why Daddy couldn't live at home anymore. William still remembered the day he had to explain to his daughter that he would be living in a different house, but that he would always love her more than anything in the world. "But why can't you just get a different job, Daddy?" Emma had asked with tears in her bright blue eyes. "One where you don't have to go away all the time." William had knelt down to her level and taken her small hands in his much larger ones. "Sometimes, sweetheart, grown-ups have to do jobs that are very important, even when they're hard. Daddy's job is to help keep people safe, and that means sometimes I have to go to places that are far away." Emma had nodded solemnly, though William could see she still didn't really understand. How could a 7-year-old comprehend the complexities of duty, honor, and the sacrifices that military families have to make? Now, 18 months later, William found himself deployed in one of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan. His unit had been tasked with a particularly hazardous mission. They were to establish a forward operating base in an area where Taliban activity had been increasing. Intelligence reports suggested that the enemy was planning a major offensive, and William's team was part of the advance force meant to disrupt those plans. The mission had been going well for the first 2 weeks. They had successfully established their base and had been gathering valuable intelligence about enemy movements in the region. But 3 days ago, everything had changed. William's commanding officer, Major Thompson, had called him into the command tent for a private briefing. The major's face had been grim as he spread out a map on the rough wooden table. "William, I need you and your team to undertake a reconnaissance mission tomorrow morning," Major Thompson had said, pointing to a valley marked in red on the map. "We've received intelligence that there's a large Taliban force gathering in this area, and we need to confirm their numbers and positions." William had studied the map carefully, noting the terrain and the various routes in and out of the valley. It was a dangerous mission. The valley was known to be heavily defended, and there would be very little cover for his small reconnaissance team. "With respect, this looks like it could be a trap," William had said quietly. "The intelligence seems almost too good to be true. What if they want us to come looking for them?" Major Thompson had nodded grimly. "That's exactly what I'm thinking, Captain. But we can't ignore the possibility that they really are massing forces for an attack on our main base. If they are, and we don't act on this intelligence, we could be looking at a disaster that costs hundreds of lives." William had understood the dilemma immediately. In war, commanders often had to make decisions based on incomplete information, weighing the risks of action against the risks of inaction. If the Taliban really were planning a major attack, then this reconnaissance mission, dangerous as it was, could provide the intelligence needed to save many lives. "How many men will I have?" William had asked. "6," the major had replied. "I know it's not many, but we can't spare more without compromising our defensive positions here. You'll be going in light and fast, gather the intelligence and get out as quickly as possible." That night, William had lain awake in his sleeping bag, staring up at the canvas roof of his tent and thinking about Emma. He thought about the last time he had seen her, 6 months ago when he was home on leave. They had spent a wonderful week together, going to the zoo, playing in the park, and reading bedtime stories every night. Emma had grown so much since his previous visit. She was learning to read now, sounding out words carefully and looking up at him with pride whenever she managed to decode a particularly challenging sentence. She had also started taking piano lessons, and she had played him a simple melody she had learned, her small fingers moving carefully across the keys. "Daddy, will you teach me to be brave like you?" she had asked one evening as he was tucking her into bed. "You're already braver than you know, little one," William had replied, kissing her forehead. "But remember, being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right, even when you are scared." No, as William prepared for what could be his final mission, those words seemed to echo back to him. He was certainly scared. Any rational person would be frightened of walking into what was likely a trap. But he also knew that his duty required him to take this risk, just as it had required him to take so many others throughout his career. William picked up his pen and began to write. The words came slowly at first, then faster as his emotions took over. "My dearest Emma," he wrote, "Daddy is writing you a very special letter tonight. I want you to know that you are the most precious thing in the world to me, and that everything I do is because I love you so much." He paused, wondering how to explain to a 7-year-old child the complexities of his situation. How could he tell her that he might not be coming home this time without frightening her terribly? Outside his tent, William could hear his sergeant calling the men together for their final briefing before tomorrow's mission. He knew he didn't have much time to finish the letter, but he also knew that this might be his only chance to say the things he needed to say to his daughter, Emma. "Sweetheart," he continued writing, "I need to tell you some very important things, and I need you to be my brave girl while you read them. Can you do that for Daddy?" As William continued to write, his heart felt like it was breaking. He was a soldier, trained to face danger and make difficult decisions, but nothing had prepared him for the pain of potentially saying goodbye to his child through a letter. The words on the paper blurred as tears filled his eyes, but he forced himself to keep writing. Emma deserved to know how much her father loved her, no matter what happened tomorrow. William wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and continued writing, knowing that his sergeant would be calling for him soon. The weight of what he needed to communicate to Emma felt enormous, but he was determined to find the right words. "Do you remember the story I used to tell you about the brave knight who protected the kingdom?" William wrote, "Well, Daddy is like that knight, and my job is to protect people who can't protect themselves. Sometimes that means I have to go to dangerous places and do dangerous things." He paused, thinking about all the bedtime stories he had told Emma over the years. She had always loved the tales of knights and princesses, good defeating evil, and heroes who were willing to sacrifice everything to save others. At the time, William had just been trying to entertain his daughter, but now he realized that those stories had been preparing both of them for this moment. William's mind drifted back to Emma's 6th birthday party just over a year ago. Sarah had organized a beautiful celebration in their backyard, complete with a bouncy castle and a magician who had amazed the children with his tricks. William had been home on leave, and seeing Emma's face light up with joy as she opened her presents had been one of the happiest moments of his life. But what he remembered most clearly was a quiet conversation he had had with Emma later that evening. After all the guests had gone home and they were sitting together on her bed, "Daddy," Emma had said, looking up at him with those serious blue eyes that reminded him so much of his own mother. "Why do some of the other kids at school have daddies who come home every night?" The question had caught William off guard. He had tried to explain military service to Emma before, but she was still so young that the concepts were difficult for her to grasp. "Sweetheart," William had said carefully, "different daddies have different jobs. Some daddies work in offices, some work in shops, and some, like me, work as soldiers. My job means I have to travel to different places to help keep everyone safe, but I want you to keep me safe," Emma had said, her lower lip trembling slightly. "Why can't you do that job here?" William had pulled her close, feeling his heart break a little. "Oh, my brave girl, I am keeping you safe. Every single thing I do in my job is to make sure that you and Mummy and all the other children in England can sleep peacefully at night. The best way I can protect you is by doing this important work, even though it means we have to be apart sometimes." Emma had seemed to accept this explanation, though William could see that she still wished things were different. Now, as he continued writing his letter, he wondered if she had ever truly understood the sacrifices that military families have to make. "Emma," he wrote, "I need you to understand something very important. Tomorrow, Daddy has to do a very dangerous job. It's the kind of job that knights in our stories sometimes have to do, going into the dragon's lair to protect the kingdom." William's sergeant appeared at the entrance to his tent. "Captain, we need you for the final briefing now," the sergeant said quietly. "Give me 5 more minutes," Sergeant William replied. "I'm almost finished." The sergeant nodded and disappeared back into the night. William knew that his time was running out, but he couldn't leave this letter incomplete. Emma deserved to know everything he wanted to tell her. He thought about all the moments he had missed in Emma's life because of his military service. Her first steps, her first day of school, countless bedtime stories, scraped knees that needed kissing better, and proud moments at school plays and sports days. Each missed moment felt like a weight on his conscience, but he had always told himself that his service was making a better world for Emma to grow up in. "I want you to know," William continued writing, "that even though Daddy has had to be away so much, you have never been out of my thoughts for even a single day. I carry a picture of you in my pocket everywhere I go, and whenever I feel scared or lonely, I look at your beautiful smile and remember why everything I do matters." This was true. William had a photo of Emma that Sarah had taken at the beach last summer. In the picture, Emma was building an elaborate castle, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration, her hair blowing in the sea breeze. It was the most natural, happy photo of her that William had ever seen, and it had become his most treasured possession. "There's something else I need to tell you, sweetheart," William wrote. "If something happens to Daddy tomorrow, I need you to know that it's not your fault, and it's not Mummy's fault either. Sometimes, when people choose to be knights, they have to accept that they might not always come home from their adventures." The words were difficult to write, but William knew they were necessary. If the worst happened tomorrow, Emma might blame herself or wonder if there was something she could have done differently. He needed her to understand that his choice to serve was his alone, and that she should never carry any guilt about the consequences. William remembered a conversation he had had with his own father many years ago when he was considering joining the army. His father, a veteran of the Falklands War, had sat him down in their small living room and spoken very seriously about what military service really meant. "Son," his father had said, "being a soldier isn't just about the glory and the parades. It's about accepting that you might have to give up your life so that other people can live theirs in freedom. It means choosing duty over personal happiness, service over comfort. Are you prepared to make that choice?" At 18, William had thought he understood what his father meant, but it wasn't until he held Emma in his arms for the first time, 7 years ago, that he truly comprehended the magnitude of what military service could cost. Holding that tiny, perfect baby, he had realized that he now had something to lose that was more precious than his own life, yet he had continued to serve, because he believed that his daughter deserved to grow up in a world where people were willing to stand between innocence and evil, between peace and chaos. "Emma," William wrote, "I need you to promise Daddy something very important. If I don't come home from this adventure, I need you to remember that I love you more than all the stars in the sky and all the fish in the sea. I need you to be brave and kind and smart, just like I know you can be. I need you to take care of Mummy and help her when she's sad outside." William could hear his men gathering their equipment for the morning mission. The sound of weapons being checked and ammunition being counted created a backdrop of military efficiency that he had grown accustomed to over his many years of service. "Most importantly, my darling girl," he continued, "I need you to know that even if Daddy's body can't be with you anymore, my love for you will always be with you. Every time you see a rainbow, every time you hear your favorite song, every time you do something that makes you proud, I'll be there, cheering you on." William Sargent appeared at the tent entrance again. "Captain, I'm sorry, but we really need you now. The Major is waiting." William nodded and quickly scribbled the final lines of his letter. "I have to go now, sweetheart, but remember, you are my greatest treasure, my proudest achievement, and the best thing I ever did in my whole life. Be brave, be kind, and never forget how much Daddy loves you. Forever and always, your Daddy." He folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope, writing Emma's name on the front in his careful script. Then he sealed it and tucked it into his uniform pocket, along with instructions for his sergeant to make sure it reached Sarah if anything happened to him. As William stepped out of his tent and into the cool night air, he looked up at the stars and whispered a quiet prayer, not for his own safety, but for Emma's happiness and for the strength to do his duty with honor, whatever the cost might be. The sound of gunfire echoed across the Afghan mountains as William and Sergeant Collins engaged the approaching Taliban patrol. From their defensive position behind the rocky outcropping, they managed to hold off the enemy fighters for nearly 20 minutes, giving Johnson and Williams precious time to make their escape with the vital intelligence. Collins fought with the skill and determination of a career soldier, but William could see that his friend was wounded, bloodstained. The sergeant's uniform where shrapnel from a grenade had caught him in the shoulder, but the tough Scotsman kept firing with grim efficiency. "How are we doing on ammunition, Collins?" William called out during a brief lull in the fighting getting low. Sir Collins replied, wincing as he changed position. "Maybe 2 magazines left." William knew their situation was hopeless, but he felt a strange sense of peace. They had accomplished their mission. The intelligence about the massive Taliban force would reach base, and countermeasures could be taken to protect hundreds of their fellow soldiers. Johnson and Williams were good men and experienced fighters. They had a real chance of making it back safely. As the enemy fighters regrouped for what would clearly be their final assault, William thought about Emma one last time. He hoped she would understand, someday, why he had made the choices he had made. He hoped she would be proud of her father, even if she grew up without him. The attack came at sunset, just as the mountain peaks were turning gold in the dying light. William and Collins fought bravely until their ammunition ran out, and then they fought with knives and determination until they could fight no more. 3 days later, back in England, Sarah Mitchell was making dinner for Emma when the doorbell rang. Through the frosted glass of the front door, she could see 2 figures in military uniforms, and her heart immediately began to pound with dread. Every military wife knew what it meant when uniformed soldiers came to the door, unannounced. Sarah's hands shook as she opened the door to find a chaplain and a military casualty notification officer standing on her doorstep. Their faces were grave and compassionate, and Sarah knew immediately that her worst fears were about to be confirmed. Double quotes, "Mrs. Mitchell," the chaplain asked, gently. "May we come in?" Emma appeared in the hallway behind her mother, curious about the visitors. "Mummy, who is it?" she asked innocently. Sarah knelt down and took Emma's hands in hers. "Sweetheart, these gentlemen need to talk to Mummy about Daddy. Can you go play in your room for a few minutes?" Something in Sarah's tone must have alerted Emma to the seriousness of the situation, because the little girl's face became solemn. "Is Daddy okay?" she asked quietly. Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she managed to keep her voice steady. "We'll talk about it in just a moment, darling. Please, go to your room now." Emma reluctantly went upstairs, but Sarah knew she was probably listening from the top of the stairs. The child was too intelligent and intuitive not to sense that something terrible was happening. The casualty notification officer, a kind-faced woman named Major Roberts, delivered the news with as much gentleness as possible. Mrs. Mitchell, I regret to inform you that your ex-husband, Captain William Harrison, was killed in action 3 days ago in Afghanistan. He died heroically while conducting a reconnaissance mission that saved the lives of many of his fellow soldiers. Sarah had been expecting these words, but hearing them still felt like a physical blow. She sank into a chair, struggling to breathe as the reality of William's death washed over her. Despite their divorce, she had never stopped caring about him, and she knew that Emma's world was about to be shattered. How do I tell her? Sarah whispered, tears streaming down her face. How do I tell a 7-year-old that her daddy is never coming home? The chaplain, a gentleman named Father Mackenzie, sat down beside Sarah. There's no easy way to deliver such news to a child, he said softly. But children are often stronger and more resilient than we expect them to be. The most important thing is to be honest with her, to let her grieve, and to make sure she knows that her father's love for her was real and permanent. Major Roberts reached into her briefcase and withdrew an envelope. Captain Harrison asked his sergeant to make sure this reached his daughter if anything happened to him. Sergeant Collins survived the mission though he was seriously wounded, and he made sure we received this before he went into surgery. Sarah took the envelope with trembling hands. Emma's name was written on the front in William's careful handwriting, and Sarah recognized it immediately. How many birthday cards and letters had she seen him write to Emma in that same script? There's something else, Major Roberts said gently. Captain Harrison's actions during his final mission were extraordinarily heroic. The intelligence he and his team gathered prevented a major Taliban offensive that could have cost hundreds of lives. He's being recommended for the Military Cross posthumously. Sarah nodded, barely able to process this information. She was proud of William, but all she could think about was Emma and how devastated the little girl was going to be. After the military personnel left, Sarah sat alone in her living room, holding the letter and trying to gather the courage to call Emma downstairs. She could hear her daughter moving around in her bedroom above, and she knew the child was waiting anxiously to find out what the visit had been about. Finally, Sarah called up the stairs. Emma, sweetheart, can you come down here please? Mummy needs to talk to you about something very important. Emma appeared at the top of the stairs, her small face serious and worried. She walked down slowly, as if she already sensed that her life was about to change forever. Sarah sat on the couch and patted the cushion beside her. Come sit with me, darling. Emma climbed up onto the couch and curled up against her mother's side. Mummy, you've been crying. Is it about Daddy? Sarah took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Yes, sweetheart, it is about Daddy. I need to tell you something very sad, and I need you to be my brave girl, just like Daddy always said you were. Emma looked up at her mother with those serious blue eyes that were so much like William's. What happened to him, Mummy? Daddy was hurt very badly while he was doing his soldier job, Sarah said, her voice breaking slightly. He was being very brave and helping to keep other soldiers safe, but he got hurt so badly that the doctors couldn't make him better. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Does that mean Daddy died? She asked in a small voice. Sarah's heart broke at the matter-of-fact way Emma asked the question. Yes, darling. Daddy died. He can't come home to us anymore. Emma began to cry then, not the dramatic sobbing of a child throwing a tantrum, but the deep, heartbroken tears of someone who understands loss. Sarah held her daughter close, both of them weeping together for the man who had loved them both so much. After several minutes, Emma pulled back and looked at her mother. Did Daddy know he might die when he went away this time? The question surprised Sarah with its I think maybe he did know it was very dangerous. Yes, then why did he go? Emma asked, and Sarah could hear William's voice in the child's serious tone. Sarah thought about how to answer this question honestly. Because Daddy was a very special kind of person, sweetheart. He believed that it was his job to protect people who couldn't protect themselves, even if it was dangerous for him. He went because he thought it was the right thing to do. Emma nodded slowly, seeming to understand this explanation better than Sarah had expected. Is there something for me? She asked, noticing the letter in her mother's hand. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Yes, darling. Daddy wrote you a letter before. Before what happened? Would you like me to read it to you, or would you like to try reading it yourself? Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her small hand. Can we read it together? She asked. Sarah's heart felt like it was breaking and mending at the same time. Of course we can, my brave girl. Of course we can. The next morning came too quickly for William's liking. He had barely slept, spending most of the night staring at the canvas ceiling of his tent and thinking about Emma. When dawn finally broke over the Afghan mountains, casting long shadows across the rugged landscape, William felt a strange mixture of peace and apprehension. His team gathered at the edge of their base camp at first light. There were 6 men in total, all experienced soldiers who had served together on multiple missions. Sergeant Collins, a gruff Scotsman with 20 years of military experience, checked everyone's equipment one final time. Private Johnson, barely 21 but already a veteran of 2 tours, nervously adjusted his rifle strap. Corporal Williams, a quiet man from Wales who had a wife and twin boys at home, stared thoughtfully at the mountains ahead. Major Thompson approached the group, his face serious in the pale morning light. "Gentlemen, you know the mission. Get into that valley, confirm the enemy positions and numbers, and get out quickly. Intelligence suggests we're looking at approximately 50 Taliban fighters, but that number could be higher or lower." William listened to the briefing, but part of his mind was still with Emma. He wondered what she was doing at that moment, probably getting ready for school, eating her breakfast cereal while chattering to Sarah about her plans for the day. The time difference meant it was already mid-morning in England. "Captain Harrison will lead the team," Major Thompson continued. "You'll approach from the eastern ridge, which should give you the best vantage point while minimizing your exposure. Remember, this is reconnaissance only. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary." The team began their trek toward the target valley just as the sun was rising fully above the mountain peaks. The terrain was challenging, with steep rocky paths and loose scree that made every step treacherous. William had made similar journeys dozens of times throughout his career, but today felt different. Every rock that shifted under his feet, every bird that took flight as they passed, seemed to carry special significance. As they walked, William found himself thinking about a conversation he had had with Emma during his last visit home. They had been walking through the park near Sarah's house, feeding ducks at the small pond, when Emma had asked him a question that had surprised him with its depth. "Daddy, are you ever scared when you're at work?" she had asked, tossing breadcrumbs to a group of eager mallards. William had considered lying, telling her that soldiers were never scared, but something about Emma's serious expression had made him decide on honesty instead. "Yes, sweetheart, sometimes I am scared," he had admitted. "Being scared is normal when you're doing something dangerous, but you know what? Being scared doesn't mean you can't be brave at the same time." "How can you be both?" Emma had asked, looking up at him with those intelligent blue eyes. Well, William had explained. Being brave doesn't mean you don't feel scared. It means you feel scared but you do the right thing anyway. Like when you were afraid to go to your first day at your new school, but you went anyway because you knew it was important. Emma had nodded solemnly, seeming to understand this concept in the way that children sometimes grasp complex ideas more easily than adults expect them to. As William led his team deeper into hostile territory, he remembered that conversation and realized that Emma had taught him something important about courage. She had shown him that bravery was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act despite fear. After 3 hours of difficult hiking, the team reached their observation position on the eastern ridge overlooking the target valley. William pulled out his binoculars and began scanning the area below. What he saw made his blood run cold. The valley was indeed full of Taliban fighters, but there were far more than the 50 that intelligence had suggested. William counted at least 200 armed men, along with several vehicles and what appeared to be a significant cache of weapons and supplies. This wasn't just a gathering for a single attack. This looked like preparations for a sustained offensive campaign. "Jesus Christ," whispered Sergeant Collins, who was observing through his own binoculars. "There's an army down there, Captain." William continued his systematic observation, noting the positions of sentries, the types of weapons visible, and the layout of the temporary camp. This intelligence would be crucial for planning any military response, but it also confirmed his worst fears about the mission. The Taliban presence was so large and well organized that his small team would have no chance of escape if they were discovered. Private Johnson, the youngest member of the team, was scanning a different section of the valley when he suddenly went rigid. "Captain," he whispered urgently, "I've got movement on the northern slope. Looks like a patrol coming this way." William turned his binoculars toward the area. Johnson had indicated and saw a group of about 10 Taliban fighters making their way up the mountainside, apparently heading directly toward their position. His heart sank as he realized what this meant. They had been expected. "This is a trap," Sergeant Collins said quietly, confirming what they were all thinking. "They knew we were coming." William's mind raced through their options. They could try to withdraw the way they had come, but the approaching patrol would almost certainly spot them. They could try to find an alternative route down the mountain, but they didn't know the terrain well enough to avoid other enemy positions. Or they could stay and fight, but against such overwhelming numbers, that would certainly mean death for all of them. Double quote, "Sir, what are your orders?" Corporal Williams asked, his voice steady despite the desperate situation they found themselves in. William thought about the letter in his pocket, about Emma waiting for him at home, about Sarah who had already suffered so much because of his military career. He thought about his team, all good men with families who loved them and needed them to come home safely. But he also thought about the intelligence they had gathered, and what it meant for the larger military operation. If this Taliban force launched their offensive without warning, hundreds of British and coalition soldiers could die. The main base where Major Thompson and over 300 other soldiers were stationed would be completely overrun. "Collins," Williams said quietly, "do we still have radio contact with base?" The sergeant checked his radio equipment. "Yes, sir, but probably not for much longer. The terrain will block the signal once we start moving." William made his decision. "Johnson, Williams, I need you two to start making your way down the back side of this ridge. Move carefully and quietly. Your job is to get back to base and report what we found here. That information could save hundreds of lives. What about you and Collins? Johnson asked. We're going to stay here and buy you some time, William replied. Someone needs to slow down that patrol and create a distraction so you can escape. Sergeant Collins nodded grimly. He had served with William long enough to understand what this decision meant. Understood, Captain. Williams looked like he wanted to argue, but he was too good a soldier to question orders in such a critical situation. Sir, it's been an honor serving with you. As Johnson and Williams began their dangerous descent down the back of the ridge, William positioned himself behind a large rock outcropping that would give him and Collins the best possible defensive position. The approaching Taliban patrol was now less than 500 meters away and climbing steadily toward their location. William pulled out the letter to Emma and read it one more time. Then he carefully placed it back in his pocket, making sure it was secure. If he didn't survive the next hour, he wanted to make sure that letter found its way to his daughter. Collins, he said to his sergeant, if something happens to me, there's a letter in my breast pocket. Make sure it gets to my little girl. The grizzled sergeant nodded. I will, sir, but let's plan on both of us delivering our letters personally when we get home. William smiled at his old friend's optimism, even though they both knew the odds they were facing. As he checked his rifle one final time and prepared for what would likely be his final battle, William whispered one last message to the daughter he might never see again. Be brave, my darling Emma. Daddy loves you forever. Sarah's hands trembled as she carefully opened the envelope containing William's final letter to Emma. The little girl sat pressed close against her mother's side on the couch, her eyes red from crying but filled with a determination to hear her father's last words too. The letter was written on simple military stationery, and Sarah could see places where William's tears had smudged the ink slightly. His handwriting was careful and deliberate, as if he had wanted to make sure every word was perfectly clear. Shall I read it out loud, sweetheart? Sarah asked gently. Emma nodded, her small hand reaching out to touch the paper. That's Daddy's writing, she said softly. I can tell because he always makes his letters so neat. Sarah began to read, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. My dearest Emma, Daddy is writing you a very special letter tonight. I want you to know that you are the most precious thing in the world to me, and that everything I do is because I love you so much. Emma's lower lip began to tremble, but she listened intently as Sarah continued. Do you remember the story I used to tell you about the brave knight who protected the kingdom? Well, Daddy is like that knight, and my job is to protect people who can't protect themselves. Sometimes that means I have to go to dangerous places and do dangerous things. I remember those stories, Emma whispered. The knight always saved everyone. Sarah paused, wondering if she should continue or if this was too much for a 7-year-old to hear. But Emma looked up at her with those serious blue eyes and said quietly, Please keep reading, Mummy. I want to hear all of Daddy's words. Sarah took a breath and continued. Emma, I need you to understand something very important. Tomorrow, Daddy has to do a very dangerous job. It's the kind of job that knights in our stories sometimes we have to do, going into the dragon's lair to protect the kingdom. Emma's face scrunched up in concentration as she tried to understand what her father was telling her. Was Daddy fighting a dragon? She asked. In a way, yes, Sarah replied, thinking about how to explain the complexities of war to a child. There are bad people in the world who want to hurt innocent people, and Daddy's job was to stop them. Sarah continued reading the letter, her voice growing softer as William's words became more emotional. I want you to know that even though Daddy has had to be away so much, you have never been out of my thoughts for even a single day. I carry a picture of you in my pocket everywhere I go, and whenever I feel scared or lonely, I look at your beautiful smile and remember why everything I do matters. Emma's eyes widened. Daddy had my picture with him. Yes, darling, Sarah said, remembering the beach photo that William had always carried. He showed it to me once when he was home on leave. It was that picture of you building the sandcastle last summer. The next part of the letter was harder to read, and Sarah's voice began to shake. There's something else I need to tell you, sweetheart. If something happens to Daddy tomorrow, I need you to know that it's not your fault, and it's not Mummy's fault either. Sometimes, when people choose to be knights, they have to accept that they might not always come home from their adventures. Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing these words. Then she looked up at Sarah with a wisdom that seemed far beyond her years. Daddy knew he might not come back, didn't he? Sarah nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When she found her voice again, she continued with the letter. Emma, I need you to promise Daddy something very important. If I don't come home from this adventure, I need you to remember that I love you more than all the stars in the sky and all the fish in the sea. That's what he always used to say. When he tucked me into bed, Emma whispered, fresh tears beginning to fall. Sarah's own tears made it difficult to continue, but she forced herself to keep reading. I need you to be brave and kind and smart, just like I know you can be. I need you to take care of Mummy and help her when she's sad. Emma sat up straighter when she heard this. I can do that, she said with determination. I can help take care of Mummy. Most importantly, my darling girl, Sarah continued, I need you to know that even if Daddy's body can't be with you anymore, my love for you will always be with you. Every time you see a rainbow, every time you hear your favorite song, every time you do something that makes you proud, I'll be there, cheering you on." Emma was crying harder now, but she was also listening with complete attention to every word. Sarah could see that despite her young age, Emma was understanding the depth of her father's love and the significance of his sacrifice. The letter concluded with William's final words to his daughter: "I have to go now, sweetheart, but remember, you are my greatest treasure, my proudest achievement, and the best thing I ever did in my whole life. Be brave, be kind, and never forget how much Daddy loves you. Forever and always, your Daddy." When Sarah finished reading, both mother and daughter sat in silence for several minutes, holding each other close. Finally, Emma spoke up in a small but clear voice. "Mummy, can I keep Daddy's letter?" "Of course, darling," Sarah replied. "It's yours. Daddy wrote it especially for you." Emma carefully took the letter from her mother's hands and held it against her chest. "I'm going to read it whenever I miss Daddy," she said. Over the following weeks, Emma surprised everyone with her resilience and maturity. She helped Sarah with household tasks. She comforted her mother when Sarah cried, and she spoke about William with a mixture of sadness and pride that amazed the adults around her. Sarah's sister, Helen, came to stay with them for a while to help with Emma and provide emotional support. One evening, about 2 weeks after they had received the news of William's death, Helen found Emma sitting in her bedroom, carefully copying her father's letter into a school notebook. "What are you doing, sweetie?" Helen asked gently. "I'm making copies," Emma explained seriously. "So if something happens to Daddy's letter, I'll still have his words." Helen's heart ached at the thought of this 7-year-old child worrying about losing the only thing she had left of her father. "That's very smart thinking. Emma, can I ask you something?" Emma nodded, looking up from her careful copying. "How are you feeling about everything that's happened?" Helen asked. "It's okay if you're angry or confused or sad." Emma considered this question thoughtfully. "I am sad," she said finally. "I'm really sad that Daddy won't come home anymore. But I'm also proud of him. Why is that?" "Because he was brave like the knights in our stories," Emma explained. "And because he saved other people's daddies so they could go home to their children. Daddy's letter helped me understand that he didn't want to leave me, but he had to do his job." Helen was amazed by Emma's understanding. "You're a very wise little girl, Emma. Your daddy would be so proud of how brave you're being." "I promised him I would be brave," Emma said simply. "And I promised I would take care of Mummy. Daddy kept all his promises to me, so I'm going to keep all my promises to him." That night, Sarah found Emma's notebook on her bedside table, where the little girl had been practicing writing out her father's letter. But Sarah also noticed that Emma had written something of her own at the bottom of the page, in her careful 7-year-old handwriting. Emma had written, "Dear Daddy, I got your letter and I understand. I will be brave like you taught me. I will take care of Mummy like you asked. I will remember you every day and I will make you proud. I love you forever and always too. You're brave girl." Sarah realized then that William's final letter had accomplished something extraordinary. It had not only expressed his love for his daughter, but it had also given Emma the tools she needed to cope with his loss and to carry forward his values of courage, service, and love. 5 years had passed since Captain William Harrison died in the mountains of Afghanistan, and Emma Mitchell was now 12 years old. She had grown into a thoughtful, compassionate young girl who carried herself with a quiet dignity that reminded everyone who knew her of her father. The letter William had written to Emma remained one of her most treasured possessions. She had read it hundreds of times over the years, and each time she discovered something new in her father's words. The original letter was carefully preserved in a frame on her bedroom wall, while she kept a copy in her school bag to read whenever she felt sad or needed courage. Emma attended the same primary school she had been going to when her father died, and her teachers often remarked on her maturity and kindness toward other students. She had a particular talent for comforting classmates who were upset or struggling, and she often shared stories about her father's belief in being brave and kind. Sarah had never remarried. Though she had dated occasionally over the years, she found that no relationship felt right when measured against the deep love she had shared with William, despite their divorce. Instead, she focused her energy on raising Emma and on volunteering with military family support organizations. One autumn afternoon, Emma came home from school with an assignment that would change both their lives in an unexpected way. Her English teacher, Mrs. Peterson, had asked the class to write about someone they considered a hero and to share their story with the class. "I want to write about Daddy," Emma told Sarah over dinner. "But I want to do more than just tell his story. I want to read his letter to the class, if that's okay with you." Sarah was surprised by this request. Emma had always been protective of her father's letter, sharing it only with very close family members. "Are you sure you want to do that, sweetheart? That letter is very personal." Emma nodded seriously. "I've been thinking about it a lot. Daddy wrote in his letter that he hoped his sacrifice would help protect other people. Maybe if I share his words, it will help other kids understand what it means when their parents have to go away to serve in the military." There were several children in Emma's class whose parents were currently deployed with the armed forces, and Emma had noticed how worried and sad some of them seemed. She remembered her own fears and confusion when her father was away on missions, and she thought that hearing about his love and dedication might comfort them. Mrs. Peterson was deeply moved when Emma approached her about sharing her father's letter with the class. The teacher had heard about Captain Harrison's heroic sacrifice from other staff members, and she knew that Emma's presentation would be something special. On the day of Emma's presentation, she stood in front of her classmates with a framed letter in her hands. She was nervous, but she remembered her father's words about being brave even when you're scared. "My hero is my father, Captain William Harrison," Emma began, her voice clear and steady. "He died 5 years ago when I was 7, but before he died, he wrote me a letter that has helped me understand what it means to be brave and to serve others." The classroom was completely silent as Emma began to read her father's letter aloud. Some of her classmates had tears in their eyes as they heard William's words about love, the sacrifice, and the importance of protecting others. When Emma finished reading the letter, she looked up at her classmates and said, "My daddy died because he believed that some things are worth fighting for, like keeping children safe and protecting people who can't protect themselves. He taught me that being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do what's right even when you are scared." One of Emma's classmates, a boy named Jack whose father was currently deployed in Iraq, raised his hand tentatively. "Emma, do you think my dad wrote me a letter like that too?" Emma smiled gently. "I don't know if he wrote it down, Jack, but I'm sure he tells you he loves you every time he calls or writes, doesn't he?" Jack nodded, looking a little comforted. "Then he's telling you the same thing my daddy told me in his letter," Emma said, "that he loves you more than anything, and that everything he does is to keep you safe." After Emma's presentation, Mrs. Peterson asked if she would be willing to share her father's letter with other classes in the school. Word spread quickly about the 12-year-old girl who had moved an entire classroom to tears with her father's final words. Within a few weeks, Emma found herself sharing her father's story at military family support events throughout their region. She spoke at gatherings for deployed families, at memorial services for fallen soldiers, and at schools with high populations of military children. Sarah was amazed by her daughter's poise and wisdom as she spoke to these audiences. Emma had inherited William's natural leadership qualities and his ability to inspire others, but she had also developed her own unique gift for helping people process grief and find meaning in loss. One particularly memorable event took place at a military base where Emma was invited to speak to a group of soldiers who were preparing for deployment. These were tough, experienced men and women, but they listened with rapt attention as a 12-year-old girl read her father's letter and talked about the importance of their service. After her presentation, a young soldier approached Emma with tears in his eyes. "I have a daughter about your age at home," he said. "Hearing your father's words has reminded me why I'm doing this job, and it's also shown me how important it is to make sure my daughter knows how much I love her. Write her letters," Emma advised seriously. "Even if nothing bad happens, she'll treasure them forever, but especially write her one like my daddy wrote me, just in case. It will help her understand and be proud of you." The soldier nodded gratefully and walked away, already planning what he would write to his own daughter. As Emma's story spread through social media and military networks, she began receiving letters from around the world. Military children wrote to tell her how her father's words had helped them cope with their own parents' deployments. Veterans wrote to thank her for honoring the memory of all fallen soldiers. Parents wrote to say that Emma's example had inspired them to have important conversations with their own children about service and sacrifice. On the 10th anniversary of William's death, Emma, now 17 years old, was invited to lay a wreath at the National Military Memorial. She had grown into a poised young woman who planned to study international relations at university, with the goal of working in diplomatic service. That she placed the wreath and stood for a moment of silence. Emma thought about the journey she and her mother had traveled since receiving that devastating news 10 years ago. William's final letter had been intended simply as a father's last words to his beloved daughter, but it had become something much larger, a testament to the power of love to transcend death and inspire others. That evening, Emma sat in her room and wrote in the journal she had kept since she was 8 years old. "Dear Daddy," she wrote, "today I honored your memory at the National Memorial, but I honor you every day by trying to live up to the values you taught me. Your letter didn't just help me cope with losing you, it taught me how to help others cope with their losses too. I think you would be proud of the woman I'm becoming. I know I still have so much to learn and do, but I promise to keep being brave, keep being kind, and keep remembering that love is stronger than death. Forever and always, your brave girl, Emma." William's final letter to his daughter had indeed become something extraordinary, not just a message of love from a dying father, but a source of hope and healing that continued to touch lives around the world, proving that the bonds between parent and child can transcend even death itself.